Start now.
Okay. All right. So our today's topic is keratoplasty, and I'm Dr. Yogesh Padange. So let us move on to keratoplasty, or what we call as an optical keratoplasty as such. Now, what is keratoplasty? Keratoplasty is basically a surgical process of replacing the abnormal cornea with a healthy donor corneal tissue. Now, indications can be optical, tectonic, therapeutic, or cosmetic. Optical specifically means that we are doing the transplant for visual rehabilitation, whereas in tectonic keratoplasty, we are doing a transplant to maintain the integrity of the globe. In therapeutic keratoplasty, our goal is to get rid of the infection, and in cosmetic keratoplasty, it is to maintain the clarity of the, to give the, remove the opacity of the cornea. Now, if you see different types of keratoplasties, we can divide keratoplasties into two parts. One is full thickness keratoplasties, and the other is lamellar keratoplasty. Now, lamellar keratoplasty can either be an anterior lamellar keratoplasty, where we remove the epithelium and the stroma of the patient and keep the endothelium intact, whereas in endothelial keratoplasty, it is exactly the opposite, where we are where we are removing the endothelium of the host and replacing it with a healthy donor endothelium. Now, what what are the problems with full thickness keratoplasty, as a result of which we are shifting up to lamellar keratoplasties? Now, full thickness keratoplasties have a lot of problems in itself, that it has a very high risk of rejection because of a higher antigenic load. There is rapid endothelial cell loss, poor wound strength, as a result of which there is a high chance of wound dehiscence. There is increased intraoperative complications such as cataract, glaucoma, cystoid macular edema, or endophthalmitis. There is long use of steroid which has to be given for optical keratoplasties, and the donor graft criteria has to be stringent, that you cannot take a cornea which has a cell count of less than 2000 cubic millimeter for a full thickness cornea transplant. On the other hand, if we see a lamellar keratoplasty, the host endothelium is preserved, as a result of which the rejection rate is very low. It is almost an extraocular procedure, as a result of which all those intraoperative complications such as cataract, glaucoma, cystoid macular edema is prevented. We can stop the steroid drops early in anterior lamellar keratoplasty. There is early functional visual recovery, there is no significant endothelial cell loss, and criteria for donor selection is also not stringent, that if you can take a cornea even when the cell count is very low. Similarly, in endothelial keratoplasties, we have less rejection, less use of steroid drops, no suture related problems. Tectonically, it is a very stable globe, less chances of astigmatism and low endothelial cell loss. Now, what are the investigations which has to be done in a preoperative period if we want to go ahead with the cornea transplant? Now, the first and the most important thing which we have to document is visual acuity in both the eyes, and draw a proper diagram where we can see the size of the lesion and the quadrants of vascularization or deep vascularization which is present. We have to evaluate the ocular surface for any entropion, ectropion, exposure keratopathy, or dry eyes. If any of these problems are present, you address them first before undergoing a cornea transplant. For intraocular procedure, it is really very difficult to measure intraocular pressures in patients of opaque cornea. In such cases, we can take clues by doing a projection of rays, which, if it is present, then we can be roughly sure that the optic nerve function is doing well. We can do a digital intraocular pressure, and we can do a B scan to rule out glaucomatous optic atrophy. B scan has other role also. It can tell us about gross anatomical problems such as choroidal detachment, retinal detachment, glaucomatous optic atrophy. In cases of children who are not able to tell us about the visual acuity, it is better to see a flash visual evoked potential so that we know whether their optic nerve is functional or not. We can also do a consensual light reflex and see the pupillary constriction in the other eye. Now, there are certain specific investigations which has to be done in lamellar keratoplasty. such as if suppose, let's say we want to do an anterior lamellar keratoplasty or a DALC surgery. In such cases, it is important for us to do a pentacam so that we know by a pachymetry map where exactly the cone is located. Finally, what is our purpose? We want to get rid of that cone. So this pachymetry map can help us to know exactly where the location of the cone is. Similarly, an anterior segment OCT. An anterior segment OCT will tell us how much is the depth of the scar and whether the endothelium is paired or not, so that we can go ahead and do a anterior lamellar keratoplasty in these patients. Now, let's assume if you have a patient of Fuchs dystrophy with cataract. Now, it is important to do a specular count in these patients so that we are sure whether we want to go ahead only with a cataract surgery or we want to do a combined procedure. Any patient of Fuchs endothelial dystrophy who has a cell density of less than 500 cubic millimeter or a pachymetry of more than 640 microns tell us that this graft is not going to do well after the cataract surgery and it is better to plan a combined procedure. The other thing which you need to see is the coefficient of variation and the percentage of hexagonal cells. Now the percentage of hexagonal cells, the value should always be more than 60 and the coefficient of variation should not go beyond 40, which tells us whether the endothelial cells are healthy or not. Now, once we know all these factors, it is always important to know what prognosis we can expect in our cornea transplants. Now, there are certain diseases such as keratoconus, Fuchs endothelial dystrophy, pseudophakic bullous keratopathy. Now, these cornea transplants, we know they are going to do well after the surgery. But there are certain other diseases such as severe dry eyes, Stevens-Johnson, where we are sure that the graft is not going to do well. Now, this is a very important concept which all PGs should remember about the high-risk graft. Now, we all know that the corneal transplant, cornea is immune privileged. It means that among all the cornea transplant which is done in the body, the most successful is cornea transplant. The reason being, the cornea has certain immune privilege, such as it does not have any blood vessels, does not have any lymphatics, it has a very tight blood aqueous barrier, and the aqueous humor also has certain elements which suppresses the inflammation. But there are certain factors which, if we see in pre-operative period, we know that this graft has a high risk of rejection post-operatively. Now, what are these factors? The most important factor among these is corneal neovascularization. I'm talking about deep vascularization which comes in the stroma, not the one which is superficial on the epithelium side. Now, if you have more than 2 quadrants of deep vascularization, there is a very high chance that this graft might not do well after the surgery. The other factors which tells us about the high-risk graft is very young age patient, which tells us that the immune response will be very strong. A large graft where it is more close proximity to the limbal cells, presence of glaucoma or anterior synechia, presence of any previous ocular surgeries. All these factors, if present, we have to be sure that these grafts have a high risk of rejection and we have to manage our medicines accordingly. Now, what are the things which we have to see in the pre-operative period? In pre-operative period, the most important thing which you have to see is that the eye is quiet for the last 3 months, that there is no inflammation. There has been no intraocular surgery which has been done for the last 3 months, that the IOP is controlled before taking up the patient for the cornea transplant surgery. And the most important, the quality of the donor which you are taking. Now, it is important to see the death to preservation time, which ideally has to be less than 6 hours. The lens status, a phakic lens status is much better than a pseudophakic or a aphakic lens status. And the specular count, ideally, which has to be more than 2,500 cells per cubic millimeter for doing a full thickness keratoplasty. Now, there has been a lot of research for ABO matching, gender matching, and major histocompatibility complex matching donor corneas, but at present, as such, we are not doing it in India. Let's say in future, we might see about all these matching in donor corneas. Coming to optical keratoplasty as such, the most important thing which we have to see is choosing the graft size. Now, the graft size has to be chosen according to the size of the lesion which is present. Now, this size of the lesion can be known either pre-operatively by using a slit beam and measuring the size in millimeters, or intraoperatively where we can use a digital caliper to measure the size of the lesion. Ideally, the optical keratoplastic graft has to be between 7.5 to 8.5 millimeter. If any graft is less in size of less than 7.5, let's say, then the chances of astigmatism increases and the optical quality of the cornea goes down. On the other hand, if we have a larger graft, let's say more than 8.5 millimeter, then this graft has two problems. It is more close to the limbus, as a result of which the chances of rejection increases, and also it causes something called as crowding of the angles, as a result of which there is more chance of having anterior synechia and rise in intraocular pressure. Now, for the donor cornea has to be 0.5 mm larger than the recipient trephine size which we are using. Reason being, we do not want excessive flattening in the donor cornea. But we should also remember that there are some instances where the graft host disparity is more than 0.5 millimeter, like 0.75 or 1 mm also can be taken. A larger graft can be taken in cases such as pediatric keratoblasties, or a patient who is phakic or has a lot of anterior synechia, or a large therapeutic graft whose graft size is more than 9.5. All these patients has a tendency of having a shallow AC post-operatively. For this reason, to get a deep anterior chamber, it is important to have a graft size larger than 0.5, either 0.75 or 1 millimeter in size. Now coming to, Sumit, you are able to hear?
I can hear you very well.
Yeah. Now coming to trephination. Now, while doing a trephination, we have to make sure that it is centrally placed, that you are covering the entire lesion completely with the trephine, and the movement which you have to do while doing a trephination is either clockwise or anti-clockwise. You don't have to do both the movements simultaneously. Make sure that you do not perforate the cornea while doing trephination. You have to go to 80% of the depth of the cornea, and then you have to stop. After that, you can use your corneal scissor to dissect out the rest of the cornea. For suturing, the most important sutures are the 4 cardinal sutures which we place on the cornea. Now, we call it a cardinal suture because these are the sutures which will distribute the corneal tissue equally in all the parts. So, make sure that these cardinal sutures are well placed and you get a diamond sign at the end of the surgery. The diamond sign means all the 4 sutures are equally placed and you have a nice diamond structure which tells us that the tissue is equally distributed in all 4 quadrants. Regarding the depth of the suture, it has to be around
7:30 बजे प्रीवियस देखना उसका बैक करके.
Yeah. So regarding the depth,
Sumit, can you hear me? Yogesh, just a minute. Yogesh, just a minute. Sumit.
Yeah.
Kindly mute everybody else. Yogesh, I'm sorry for the interruption.
No issues.
Because if there is an overlapping sound, then
Okay. Continue.
Yeah, Yogesh sir, you can continue.
Yeah, okay. So we saw that these 4 cardinal sutures should give you a diamond sign, which tells us that the tissue is equally distributed in all quadrants. And regarding the depth of the suture, it ideally has to be around 70 to 80% of depth in both the host and the donor cornea. And the length of the suture should be equal on both the donor as well as the recipient size. Now, the principle of suturing is that we should have an epithelial to epithelial apposition, stroma to stromal apposition, and endothelial to endothelial apposition. Now, this is a short video which tells us about the steps of the corneal transplant. First, we measure the size. This is a therapeutic graft which we are doing. We measure the size of the lesion. We then do conjunctival peritomy to prevent the bleeding. It is not necessary you have to do a conjunctival peritomy. You can do it without a peritomy also. Make sure that you have an anterior chamber entry with viscoelastic filled in the anterior chamber so that you do not decompress the cornea suddenly. Center the trephine on the lesion and only in one direction till 80% of the depth. Use the right and the left corneal scissor to get rid of the damaged cornea. Make sure that there is no residual infection in the margins. Do a large PI. This is the cardinal suture which we are placing, 4 cardinal suture with diamond sign. After 8 sutures, make sure you remove the viscoelastic from the anterior chamber and replace it with air or balanced salt solution. 16 sutures with knots buried on the donor side. This is just a short video which we showed. Now coming to post-op management. Now post-op management, the first thing which we have to give is the antibiotic. Now if suppose you have done a clean optical keratoplasty such as in keratoconus, there you can give 0.5% moxifloxacin 4 times in a day for 7 days and that's it. But if suppose you have done a therapeutic graft, let's say for gram-positive cocci, then make sure that you give fortified cefazolin or fortified vancomycin for a period of 2 weeks. If you have gram-negative cocci, you give fortified tobramycin 1.3% for 1 or 2 weeks. You can give steroids right from day 1 if it is a bacterial keratitis for which you have done a therapeutic keratoplasty. In fungal keratitis, however, you have to make sure that you do not start with steroids on day 1. In LV Prasad, where we did our fellowship, the protocol was to give natamycin for a period of 14 days. And if there is no recurrence, then to add steroids after 14 days. Similarly, in herpetic keratitis, you can give oral acyclovir 400 milligram 5 times in a day for the first week. And then a prophylactic dose of 400 milligram twice in a day for at least 6 months. Make sure that you monitor the patient's CBC, blood pressure and creat values while the patient is on acyclovir. We can also give it pre-operatively, 2 weeks pre-op, oral acyclovir 400 mg twice in a day. Coming to topical steroids, we usually, if we have done a clean graft, we start with topical prednisolone or dexamethasone. Preferably, we start it on topical prednisolone because it has less chance of having an IOP spike compared to dexamethasone. Prednisolone, we give it 4 times in a day for 3 months. Then for every quarter of the year, like 3 to 6 months, we reduce it to 3 times. For 6 to 9 months, we reduce it to 2 times. And for 9 months to 1 year, we reduce it to one time. And then continue it for once in a day as long as we consider it necessary. Now, in lamellar keratoplasty, it is not essential to give such a long course of steroids. We can taper off the steroids much earlier in lamellar keratoplasties. Regarding immunosuppressive, now azathioprine, cyclosporine, all these drugs has to be given only in patients who have a high risk of rejection, which I've already discussed, which are the patients who have a high chance of having a graft rejection. Regarding mydriatics, we choose either fomatropin or atropine, but make sure that you give it only if there is uveitis and not more than 7 days. Because if you give it for a longer period of time, there is a high chance that you might crowd the angles and cause permanent peripheral anterior synechia. IOP control, it is very difficult to measure the IOP, but you can measure it carefully by doing a digital pressure or monitoring the optic disc. Considering the removal of sutures, if there is an optical keratoplasty, we do not remove sutures before 1 year. We at least have to wait for 1 year so that there is some strength at the graft-host junction. And after that also you have to release it by looking at the topography maps, and maybe 1 or 2 sutures per week has to be removed very slowly. Once we have removed all the suture, then it is a time for visual rehabilitation, which can either be done by giving the patient glasses or by giving RGP lenses if the astigmatism is very high. Now, there are a lot of complications which we can encounter by doing a keratoplasty, but in this short period, it is not, I will not be able to discuss all the complications. We will concentrate only on graft failure and what are the causes of graft failure. Now, what do you mean by graft failure? It is inability of the optical graft to maintain the graft clarity, leading to loss of vision. Now, graft failure can have various causes, out of which the most important cause is graft rejection. It is an immunologic cause for graft failure. The other causes are primary graft failure, recurrence of the original disease in the graft, infection, rise in IOP, loss of endothelial cells due to apoptosis, and wound dehiscence due to trauma. Now, a lot of people have problems in definition of primary graft failure. Primary graft failure is nothing but a graft which failed to clear up right from day one of the surgery. Now, the most common cause for primary graft failure is the poor quality of graft which you have taken. If the graft quality which you have taken is poor, then the graft might never clear off, as a result of which it lands up in primary graft failure. Coming to the most important cause of graft failure, that is graft rejection. As already told, it is an immunologic process in which the optical graft fails to maintain the graft clarity and it becomes edematous. Now, the most important, the most common sign which we see in graft rejection is corneal edema, and the second most important is the keratic precipitates, non-granulomatous keratic precipitates, which is present on the donor endothelial part. Now, we sometimes divide this graft rejection into mild and severe cases. A mild one is the one which only has stromal edema with hardly any anterior chamber cells, and the severe rejection is the one where there are large number of keratic precipitates along with the severe anterior segment reaction. In case of mild rejection, we can treat these patients by giving them 1 hourly prednisolone drops. But if you have a severe rejection, like you have a lot of keratic precipitates, then we can give them 500 milligram of methylprednisolone IV stat, ideally within 48 hours, where the success rate is very high. Now, sometimes it happens that methylprednisolone is very costly, though cheaper substitute for it is dexamethasone 100 milligram, which is equally effective as that of methylprednisolone. Oral steroids and other immunosuppressives such as cyclosporin, azathioprine, mycophenolate, and tacrolimus has to be given in conjunction or discussion with your immunologist for patients who have a high-risk graft. With this, we come to the end of the discussion, and if you have any questions, just let me or Kunjal know about it. Thank you.
So thank you, Yogesh. That was genuinely a very exhaustive presentation, very lucid. And I think most of the points important for a postgraduate have been covered. I'll just make a few points since we have a lot of time. And this will also cover up a few of the questions that have been put up. And Yogesh, please feel free to chip in too. So in the pre-op evaluation, everything was elaborated very well. Just wanted to emphasize that corneal sensations should be checked in all the patients with corneal scarring. because sometimes you may not have seen the patient earlier and you may not know that this was a patient post herpetic infection. So why is this important? It's very important because all the PGs here are going to get cases, and if you have a case with a corneal scar and vascularization as your case for the exam, then the discussion can go anywhere. And so it can begin with etiology to the management and the complications. So supposing you're thinking of a herpetic case, so then the corneal sensations are very important. You should not do surgery if the sensations are absent. If they are reduced, if they are very significantly reduced, also you should defer surgery. The eye has to be quiet for a year without any recurrences before you advise keratoplasty to the patient. And the patient has to be informed about the need for oral acyclovir post-operative. Okay, and also the fact that he may have a he can have a repeat episode of a herpetic infection in the graft. Okay. Now, another question that can really come up to a PG, because this was asked to me as a fellow, is that supposing you have a graft, a post-herpetic infection, and the patient presents with a lot of corneal edema and rejection. How would you know whether this is a recurrence of a herpetic infection or it is a graft rejection? So, supposing you have a herpetic infection with the epithelial involvement, then when you stain, you will see a lot of areas of epithelial loss, like a huge dendritic picture or a lot of epithelial loss, and it will be seen not only in the graft but also in the host. Similarly, the distribution of the KPs, it will be in the graft as well as in the host. So this is an important point which can come up in the exam vivas. Okay, and this is regarding the herpetic patients. And in addition to acyclovir, we can use valcyclovir also. Okay, then the next one small point was that you should remember that there is also a concept of a rotational rotational keratoplasty, especially in children where the opacity is very peripheral, and you can, or I mean it's in one location, and if you just rotate the graft, it can spare the patient, especially a pediatric patient, of a donor cornea. It's like an autograft only. Or in very rare cases, in a one-eyed patient who has say an optic nerve damage in one eye with a clear graft and another eye damage with a very bad cornea, you can actually switch the corneas. Okay. Another point that came up was about vascularization in the queries. So vascularization preferably should be treated before you take up the patient and not depend on any intraoperative measures. So very limited role of subconjunctival Avastin 2-3 sittings has been documented. Personally, I find it a very limited benefit. I also try and give the patients pre-operatively couple of months of topical tacrolimus. And you can, Dr. Dua has explained about, the passage of a needle inside the blood vessels and then cauterizing those blood vessels. Even that I feel has some limited benefit, but these are the things which you can do for vascularization. So intraoperatively, one should not depend on measures to reduce the vascularization. Okay, although you will do cautery, but that really doesn't make sense. Now coming to the operative part, everything very well covered. Just one important thing, because keratoconus is a very important case. In that, the question of a graft size will definitely come up in your vivas. For keratoconus, we will keep the graft size of the donor same or 0.25 more because it's a steep eye. So you want to flatten it. So you will not keep a 0.5 mm difference. Okay. So you have to cover the cone very well, and you have to keep the difference between the host and the donor same size or 0.25 larger. Okay, and use of Fleringa ring. Supposing you have a table viva and you're given a Fleringa ring in the instruments. Okay, then the discussion can go anywhere from that. So use of Fleringa ring, I think already discussed, but very important in beginners, very important in aphakics, vitrectomized eyes, and mandatory in pediatric patients. Okay. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to manage the intraocular pressure and do the suturing. There was a question about the knots budding. That's really important. The knots are to be preferentially buried in the donor itself, because then you're going to be far away from the limbus and you will not have the influx of the immunological, whatever triggers the rejection. There are some people who prefer to keep it in the host because, they feel that removing the sutures in the post-operative period without causing too much traction on the graft host junction is, that is also one reason. But I think predominantly all of us follow the burying in the donor. And just a small point, because supposing you have a patient in an exam case who has had a keratoplasty with a continuous suturing, then the discussion can go into the types of suturing. So just remember, not a very fellow level information, but the types of suturing: interrupted, continuous, single interrupted sutures combined with continuous suturing, or double continuous suturing. Just broadly, you should know the types of suturings techniques which are used in keratoplasty. Then about the post-operative use of tacrolimus, I think Yogesh already covered that it's very important to use in high-risk grafts. We have a lot of literature which shows that in high-risk grafts, cyclosporin, azathioprine, very important, and mycophenolate, very, very good results. Okay. But also topical tacrolimus is something very important. I tend to use that more than I use oral immunosuppressives. Do you agree, Yogesh? You want to say something about topical tacrolimus? Do you use that too?
Yeah, topical tacrolimus usually we add in those patients who have a steroid responsive IOP spike. So over there we can add on tacrolimus as a substitute for steroids, and usually it is given in high risk grafts wherever we have seen where the deep stromal vascularization is present. We can add tacrolimus as such.
Any long-term side effects of
Hello.
tacrolimus?
Hello. I have
Yes.
sorry to interrupt. I have a very different question. Like I wanted to know what are the basic books. Like I know American Academy is good. Any other basic books, comprehensive books we can go through is like American Academy. I know is good.
Yeah,
Any
there is
other?
one book by Dr. Rasik Bihari Vajpayee, where it covers the entire cornea transplantation. If you want to really look into cornea transplantation books, then Dr. Vajpayee has written very well about
No,
the
but
transplantation.
I agree, but I mean any comprehensive book like which has more like all the specialities or most of the specialities. Like American Academy has 13 volumes. I mean that's a good one. Then Sahu is good for notes. The Chinmaya Sahu, that's good for notes. But making good concepts like American Academy really helped. But any other good books like American Academy one can think of and suggest?
Is this Dr. Manish Garg speaking?
Yeah.
Yeah,
This is
sir, this can be discussed later also, but you can have a referral books like Albert Jacobi or Yonov. Those are very good books, or even Jia Saudi for that sake. We'll just stick to the topic at present, and the rest of the things you can just put in the message, okay?
Now, this is
Yogesh, I think, can you just go over the rejection versus failure part again? There was a question about that. You already mentioned it, but I think it needs to be repeated.
yeah. Yeah, so basically the difference between a graft failure and graft rejection. Now we should understand that graft rejection is a small subset of graft failure. Now graft failure is basically defined as an inability of the optical graft to maintain the clarity, leading to loss of vision. Now out of all the causes, one of the causes graft rejection, which is because of the immunologic process. But you should understand that there are other causes also for graft failure, that is inability to maintain the transparency. The other common cause is the apoptosis of the endothelial cells which takes place. Now, how will you differentiate whether the patient has apoptotic loss of endothelial cell or it is a graft rejection? What you have to see is the presence of keratic precipitates and anterior chamber cells. If you see that there is an anterior chamber cells and there are a lot of keratic precipitates, it is an acute onset, and you see that there is a lot of circumciliary congestion, then we are sure that we are dealing with graft rejection. But if you see an eye which only has a corneal edema, but it does not have any anterior chamber cells, it does not have any keratic precipitates, the eye is absolutely quiet, we know that the endothelium has gone down significantly, as a result of which the graft has failed. So this is the difference. Kunjal, you can add.
No, that's fine. I'm just trying to go through the questions here. Okay, so regarding the burring of the knots, we've covered that. The contact lens post PK, Yogesh already mentioned, we usually do this after all the sutures are removed. Just a quick word about cataract surgery combined with keratoplasty, if that really comes up in any of your cases or whatever. We usually, if you have a very advanced cataract and you have to do such surgery along with the keratoplasty, then you'll have to take measurements of the other eye, and that's how you'll go about taking the lens measurements. If you have to do it, if the cataract develops later on, which can be because of steroid complications, especially in young patients, then you have to wait for all the sutures to be removed, wait for 2 stable topographies, and only then go ahead with your cataract surgery. Okay. And you may need to use specialized toric intraocular lenses also, because if you have high residual astigmatism. Then role of oral steroids in early post PK. Usually I don't give too much of oral steroids, but I always give oral steroids in young patients. If it's like, keratoconus, very quiet eye preoperatively, I wouldn't really bother. Older age. If it's a younger patient, I'm doing it post corneal scar, I would like to give oral steroids. And role of tacrolimus cyclosporin already explained earlier.
Yeah, the etiology depends whether you will give oral steroids or not. We discuss about all high-risk graft patients who have more than 2 quadrants of deep vascularization, or you have patients who is prone to inflammation post-op. Then it is advisable that you start the patients on oral steroids, young patients. Otherwise, if you have a very clean case, you have operated an optical keratoplasty in a patient of non-inflammatory conditions such as keratoconus or Fuchs endothelial dystrophy, there is no role of oral steroids in such cases. So basically, it depends on etiology.
Then there's a question about graft rejection. See, the graft rejection, it's not like it can be seen within how many days, okay? Initially, you're not going to see a graft rejection because the patient will be very compliant with the use of topical steroids. So graft rejection can happen much later when you have, when you reduce the steroids or the patient stops the steroids. So there is no limit that, even after 5, 6, 8 years of doing a keratoplasty, the patient can develop a graft rejection. Okay, and the number of sutures is, if you have a graft, anything within 10 millimeter, then you will take 16 sutures. 10.5 above, we prefer to take 24 sutures, and that situation would be mostly in therapeutic grafts. Okay. Then
now,
there's a question.
One question on how to clinically differentiate between epithelial, stromal, and endothelial rejection. Now, frankly to tell, you will not see cases where you will see only epithelial rejection or stromal rejection or endothelial rejection. More than 50% of cases which will present to you clinically are either mixed rejection, where you will have keratic precipitates, and along with that you will have stromal edema. But just to complete the list, if you see a pure stromal rejection, how will it look like? It will look like adenoviral keratitis. You will see lots of stromal nummular keratitis scar which is present in the graft. And in epithelial rejection, it is less than 2%, where hardly you will see an epithelial rejection. And you will see an epithelial rejection line, which again, it is very rare to see. Now, should the graft be clear for 14 days before calling a failure? What I know as a definition, if the graft remains blurred, if it remains opaque for a period of 1 month after the surgery, then you call it as a primary graft failure. I think that answers your question. Kunjal?
Yeah. So there's another question. Can a single graft be used for 2 patients, DALK and endothelial? Absolutely, very much possible and very much doable also. You just have to be very, meticulous about, not causing any contamination, in the sense that when you do your dissection for the endothelial part first, then you have to transfer, before you touch your patient for the endothelial graft, you have to transfer the remaining graft for the DALC patient, okay, and that goes inside the sterile bottle again. So this is very much commonly done. The next question was how to assess reduced sensations when we don't have esthesiometers. We are not really using esthesiometers in daily practice. You have to use it with a very thin cotton, the cotton tip. That's how you have to check the sensations. You have to compare it with the other eye, and you have to check all the quadrants for the corneal sensations.
This question about elsewhere done 2 times therapeutic keratoplasty, but it has failed both times. What is the line of action of management in such case? Now, therapeutic keratoplasty, I already told you, the goal is to get rid of the infection, not for vision. Now, if your patient has no recurrence of infection and it is an opaque graft, we will not call it as a failure. You have treated the patient successfully by removing the infection. Now, for an opaque graft, which twice has where you have done 2 keratoplasties in the past, now this patient falls under high risk graft. Now, in these cases, you have to make sure that the patient does not have a glaucoma. Either you check it by doing a projection of rays, or you do a B scan and see for retinal detachment, correlate detachment, and optic atrophy. If none of this is present, then I think in the cover of oral steroids, you can go ahead with the 3rd transplant for optical keratoplasty.
Yeah, and the prognosis has to be very clearly explained to the patient. So there is a question about glaucoma. Pre-operatively, of course, you need to control the glaucoma very well. If not, you will have to do the glaucoma procedures beforehand or combined. Then intraoperatively, as Yogesh explained, you have to release all the synechiate, and you have to make sure that your graft size is not very large, okay? And post-operatively, you have to manage the glaucoma well, but you have to avoid PG analogs. Okay, that's regarding glaucoma and keratoplasty. And of course, peripheral iridectomy mandatory. If you're expecting too much inflammation, you can do 2 PIs during the surgery. Then there are a few questions about cyclosporin and tacrolimus. Now, first of all, topical tacrolimus, 0.03% or 0.1%. There are a lot of studies. Everything is, very mixed reviews. So there's no clear-cut answer as to which is better. But what I just do is I try to use 0.1%. And if that is not tolerated or not available, only then I will tell the patient to use topical 0.03%, because I'm not giving the patient oral immunosuppression. So I want the best topical immunosuppression to be given. As far as oral cyclosporin versus oral tacrolimus, see, there are some studies which have compared cyclosporin with mycophenolate. I'm not offhand, I don't remember studies of cyclosporin versus tacrolimus, but very difficult, to judge this. What we practically use most common is oral steroids and oral azathioprine, cyclosporin, and mycophenolate. We don't use much of oral tacrolimus. Okay. Then astigmatism and suture removal post keratoplasty. Yogesh, briefly touch upon that, please.
What is the question exactly?
It's about suture removal and post-operative astigmatism management, and how early and how late can you remove it?
The first rule, we know that if you have done an optical full thickness keratoplasty, make sure that you do not remove the suture for the first 1 year. That is a time which is needed for at least to get a good apposition of the graft-host junction. After that, if your ocular surface is stable, what you can do is do a topography and see which are the steep axis which is present. And depending on the steep axis, you can start removing a selective suture removal which can be done, which can take care of the astigmatism part. The other thing which you can do for astigmatism is to do a relaxing incisions. Now you know that there is a graft-host junction. And if suppose you have removed all the sutures and you still feel that there is one area which is very steep, you can give some relaxing incision at the graft-host junction. You just have to open up the graft-host junction a little bit in the area where there is steepening, as a result of which that area will get flattened and you will get reduction in astigmatism. The third thing which you can do, which has to be done only when your graft-host junction has been well opposed, all sutures have been removed, is to do a PRK, photorefractive keratectomy, but the results of PRK in patients post keratoplasty can not be relied upon.
Okay, so there was one question about what graft size would you use when you're doing a repeat keratoplasty. We prefer to use the same size graft. I mean, you really wouldn't want to take a larger graft than the previous graft because you've already had once failed graft. Okay, so we prefer to have the same size graft as what you will be observing intraoperatively. And of course, you should try to do a rough slit lamp measurement, and you should go over the preoperative notes if they are available.
Yeah, intraoperatively, what we can do is use a caliper to see what is the size of the old graft. And one important thing to remember, whenever you are doing a repeat transplant, never use a trephine to cut the recipient. What the graft never heals at the graft-host junction. You can just peel off. You can remove the epithelium from the surface, and you can just peel off the graft, the old graft, and then you can put a new graft on it. But if you use a trephine, there is a chance that you cannot center it properly on the graft. So peeling of the old graft is much easier rather than using a trephine.
Then there's a question of phaco versus SICS post keratoplasty. Definitely phaco is preferred. See, because you have a clear graft, then you have to, if you do a small incision, I personally would like to do a phaco, because after you've removed all the sutures, you've managed the astigmatism and you've done your calculations of the IOL power. So you would want to use, the smallest incision possible so that your calculations are perfect. So you should, I feel that phaco is definitely preferred, at least in my hands, for doing cataract surgery after keratoplasty. Yogesh, you want to say something on that? Phaco versus SICS post PK cataract.
Obviously is the choice where we'll always prefer phaco over SICS.
So minimum and maximal graft size which can be used in the PK. Somebody was asked this question in the Viva. Okay. So as we discussed, if you have a question like this, then your answer should be that I would prefer to have my graft size, the smallest graft size in an adult, okay, as 7.5, because if you can take 7, but you will expect high astigmatism, and it will be difficult to manage the astigmatism post-operatively. So if you have a question like this, your answer should be, I would prefer the optimal graft size between 7.5 and 8.5. Less than 7.5, high astigmatism. Larger than 8.5, high chances of rejection because it's closer to the limbus and induced vascularization. Okay, so that should be the answer. And if it is for a therapeutic, then obviously you're going to go larger than the size of the infiltrate. 1 millimeter clear corneal. You may even have to do a corneoscleral graft. So I'm assuming that this question was for an optical keratoplasty. Post-operatively, topical mydriatics to be used in every case or selective cases?
As I have told that it has to be used only when you see anterior segment inflammation, and make sure that you do not use it more than 7 days, because as I have already discussed, there is a high chance of iris clouding at the angles and resulting in peripheral anterior synechia. Make sure you use it for a short period of time, let's say for 7 days, not more than that.
What do you write in a short note of a triple procedure, cataract with PK? I think I already touched upon those points. If you have a question like that, then you write about your evaluation of the scar, about the grade of the cataract, about taking lens measurements from the other eye. If the patient has some old notes in which the actual measurements of the eye which is affected are there, then you can take that also. So this is about pre-operatively. Then intraoperatively, you can touch upon the points of whatever keratoplasty salient features of doing the surgery. And the cataract surgery will be an open sky. So use of flaring ring is mandatory. Using tryptophan blue to stain the capsule. Try to achieve a capsulorhexis and put the lens in the bag. Always keep a standby PMMA lens in case you have a problem and you can't and you lose the rhexis. Keep a vitrectomy ready. These are the points which I'm telling you to write in a note for a cataract with a PK, because that was the question. So keep vitrectomy ready in case there's a very high intraoperative pressure. Pre-op mannitol mandatory in these cases. Don't open the speculum too much because it will increase the intraocular pressure, and the lens will keep bulging. And after you put the lens, do a PI and then the regular suturing. Post-operative care will not change. So that is, I think that covers the question. And if you have to do the surgery after the PK, then you have to wait for the suture removal, wait for 2 stable topographies, then do your calculations, and then go ahead with the cataract surgery. How to taper steroids after PKP, that Yogesh already covered. Corneal sensations and importance to PK. Okay. So corneal sensations and keratoplasty is very important. Okay, corneal sensations, dryness, these are all related. Okay, so supposing you're going to operate a patient who has a dry eye or who has reduced corneal sensations, then the patients will keep having surface breakdowns, epithelial breakdowns. They'll get infiltrates. They will have dry eyes. Okay, so their grafts will never survive. So it is extremely important to have good corneal sensations and a moist eye before you take up the patient for keratoplasty. And supposing you already know that this patient has mildly reduced corneal sensations, then we usually do a tarsography along with the keratoplasty. There was a question about when do the sensations recover after a keratoplasty. The sensations will recover as and when the corneal nerves regenerate. Okay, so it will take over 6 months for that to happen, and that's why the importance of giving the patient lubricating drops post-operatively for a longer period. Role of multivitamins.
Yeah, Sumit.
Not really.
Missed 2 questions upwards here. When can a cataract surgery plan post PK, and should we plan a post PK cataract, or if possible should we plan a triple surgery, especially if patient has only grade 1 grade 2 cataract with corneal opacity?
Yeah, many times it depends on age. What we have been taught that if suppose you have a patient who is very old, let's say more than 60-year-old, and he has a corneal opacity, and even if his lens is not showing cataract, it is better to do a combined procedure. Because in old age, we are sure that once we do a keratoplasty and we start the patient on steroids, the patient is going to have a cataract very soon. So in such cases, let's say more than 60 years of age, it is better to go for a combined procedure rather than doing a keratoplasty and letting the patient have a second surgery for cataract, which eventually he has to develop after the use of steroid drops.
Very, very practical and nice question. How do you differentiate whether it is a post-PK patient or a post-DALC patient if you have a case in the practical exam? See, a patient post-PK, you will not have any interface, if you have a post-DALC patient, then you have the residual endothelial, the residual stroma that will be seen. So when you make a very fine slit, you will be actually able to see the interface, okay? So that you will be able to see only in a DALC patient and not in a keratoplasty patient. And you also should always look at the other eye because it will give you a clue. Supposing the other eye also has like a dystrophy, so you know that like a stromal dystrophy, then or a keratoconus, then you know that most likely this patient would have had a lamellar procedure, not a full thickness procedure.
Excellent discussion by Dr. Yogesh and Dr. Kunjan. I had one doubt. Should we discuss any modern instrumentations for the keratoplasty, like anterior chamber maintenance or use of femtosecond laser for creating these grafts? You are the better judge. Any modern instrumentation for keratoplasty?
Yeah, so now the latest things which are coming up in keratoplasty, of course, is femtosecond laser. Now, if you see femtosecond laser, it has a very precise cuts which we can achieve by doing femtosecond keratoplasty. Now, it is said that this femtosecond graft, what are the advantages of doing a femtosecond keratoplasty compared to a optical keratoplasty by Trefines? It is said that this femtosecond induces subclinical inflammatory reaction at the area where you apply those femtosecond laser, as a result of which the graft post junction apposition which takes place in femtosecond keratoplasty is much stronger than a graft which is done by a routine way of corneal trephination. Secondly, it has also been seen that the amount of rejection which takes place is less compared to the trephine done keratoplasty. We don't know the exact reason, but that is how it has been explained that the amount of rejection is less in femtosecond keratoplasty compared to optical keratoplasty. And with femtosecond laser, you can have any kind of cuts which you want. The most common which one is used is the top hat procedure, where the opposition is very strong as compared to a routine procedure where the opposition remains weak even after 1 year of suture removal.
Yogesh, a quick word about suction refines, because they may have it in the on the Viva table maybe.
Yeah. A suction trephine, yeah. Suction trephine, the advantage is usually for lamellar keratoplasty. Now, whenever you are doing a DALK procedure, you want to make sure that you do not perforate the cornea when you are doing it in keratoconus. Now, the suction trephine will help you to stabilize your trephine properly, and by one rotation, you are sure that you are going for 60 micron depth inside the cornea. So what we usually do is we use a suction trephine for procedures such as DALK because it gives us much better stability, and we are sure about the depth of the trephine which is taking place. Like we rotate it 4 times so that we are sure that we are around 240 microns deep inside the stroma.
I just want to add one point about pediatric PK, if that comes up somewhere in your Viva or in your cases. So pediatric PKs, poor prognosis, we all know that. Second thing is we have to manage with a very small size graft. So very important to use a Fleringa ring, and then the space that you're going to be working in is going to be very small, shallow anterior chambers and small corneas. So you need to take a small size graft. PI is very important. You need to use interrupted sutures because suture removal becomes sutures get loosened very quickly in pediatric patients. So you should use only interrupted sutures, and very, very frequently, as early as 2 to 3 weeks, you may have to take up the patients under anesthesia to have suture removal done for them.
The other important part in pediatric keratoplasty is you have to make sure that you cut the donor cornea first than cutting the recipient cornea, because you will not have much time to cut the donor cornea after you have opened up the eye. So make sure that you cut the donor cornea first in pediatric keratoplasty. The second thing is you have to make sure that you tell your anesthetist that you want a low intraocular pressure so that they can manage it accordingly. And post-operatively, cycloplegic refraction and routine examination under anesthesia is very important in these patients.
Yogesh, should we talk about keratoprosthesis?
Okay. What is the question on keratoprosthesis?
No, I am just bringing up a topic.
Okay.
Because they can be, artificial cornea can be kept for a table Viva.
Okay.
They could ask them, like, I have used it in cases where there is a end-off with a corneal melt also. So especially useful to do lensectomy plus anterior vitrectomy plus followed by a PKP.
So if you see in keratoprosthesis, the most common questions which they will ask are the indications of keratoprosthesis. The most common indication which we see for keratoprosthesis is multiple failed grafts. If you have multiple failed grafts, there is a likelihood that this graft is going to fail again, then these candidates are the best candidates for doing a keratoprosthesis. Other indications are patients who have a very severe deep vascularization in all 4 quadrants, patients who have chemical injuries, patients such as Stevens-Johnson's syndrome, or though we don't do a keratoplasty, but for Viva part of view, we can always answer Stevens-Johnson syndrome as one of the indication for doing a keratoprosthesis. Other than that, we have to see what are the modifications and what are the parts of keratoprosthesis which are present. The modification which we see in type 2 keratoplasty is the presence of a mucous membrane graft, which is used so as to protect the underlying keratoprosthesis. Gunjal, you can add if you want.
So I think we'll have one more session on only laminar keratoplasty.
Okay.
And, any more questions? Dr. Kunjal, you would like to add anything? Is she online?
She has muted herself. Just a minute. Yeah.
Sorry, I lost the connection for a minute in between, so I
Yeah.
lost a discussion.
Yeah. So we were just discussing that we should have one more session on only laminar keratoplasty.
Absolutely, absolutely.
The
There
same
were a couple
chapter
of questions on laminar, but I purposely
Yes.
did not attend to those because it's a separate discussion by itself. So I think we've covered most of the questions. Yogesh, anything that you want to cover up?
For keratoprosthesis, Swapnesh was asking what other things has to be covered. We have covered about the indications. Then yes, the parts of keratoprosthesis is important. It has a front plate, it has a back plate, and it has a locking ring. For that, I think Swapnesh, when we do this lamellar keratoplasty lecture, we can cover prosthesis in that part for sure.
Sure.
As far as I think, a postgraduate will not get keratoprosthesis in their exams, but they have to know what are the indications of keratoprosthesis, you know. So that and the basic, the broad guidelines, that's I think should be enough at the postgraduate level, which we can do with the laminar session.
Yeah, Yogesh already covered the indication. I think that time you were offline.
Yeah, I was offline that time.
Yes. So Sumit, should we end the session? Any more questions? We will direct a mail to both of you.
Fine. Will do.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Yogesh, for the comprehensive talk. Thank you, Swapnesh. Thank you, Sumit.
Thank you, Gunjal ma'am. Thank you, Yogesh sir. Thank you, Swapnesh sir. I'll end the meeting. Tomorrow there is a change of the topic from cornea. We are jumping to glaucoma. So there will be lecture on the glaucoma, and we'll start at 8 o'clock tomorrow.
Excellent presentation, Yogesh, and great moderation, Dr. Kunjal. I'm
Thank
sure
you
this
so much.
video will get many hits. We have already got 2,500 hits for all our videos at the BOA iTalk YouTube channel. So I request everybody to subscribe to it.
Oh, that's brilliant. I almost forgot this was being recorded. And I'm happy to see 100 people logging in also. So that's really nice.
In spite of so many big seminars and webinars already occurring at the same time.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Thank you everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye.